Hi everyone, so this presentation is for owners of dogs labelled reactive, fearful, anxious, aggressive. I would actually say that these dogs are highly sensitive to changes in their environment and that they are most likely overwhelmed with what's going on, and that's why we see these type of behaviours. This presentation will also apply to anyone who's the owner of a pup or a young dog. So this is something that we probably don't appreciate as much as we need to. Every time our dogs leave the house, they are surrounded by stimuli. And stimuli for us as dog trainers, dog people, we mean that that's things they can see, things they can hear, things they can smell, things they can feel. So even the weather on their fur, maybe the way the wind moves it, rain or snow, the textures under their feet. And they are having to deal with all of this. Their brains are working very, very hard. And we are very visual people, and our dogs are probably using more of their sense of smell or their sense of hearing. And it isn't unusual for someone to report, but I didn't see anything. There was nothing there. But actually what our dog's reacting to is something that they've smelt or something that they've heard, which was something that we had no access to or no understanding of. So before we think about going outside with the dogs, what we really need to think about is what's going on inside of them. Just to get a bit more of a clearer understanding on how their brain's working, what's happening to their bodies, and how we can help them process more of this information from the environment. I'm not going to get a degree in neuroscience for this, but what I'm going to do is just take a simple look with you at a dog's brain. And what we're going to do is break it down into three parts: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. And I've added some of the other labels you might come across to the slide. Hindbrain. So this is what we call the blueprint. That's all those things you never had to teach your dog to do. And they all come from this part of the brain. So things like eating, drinking, jumping, running, and there's plenty more on the slide. So this is where all the behaviors that we know as a dog, they're all stored in this part of the brain. And the midbrain. So this is a really important section of the brain. This is the place where survival happens. This is the bit of the brain that works really hard to keep your dog alive. But this can also be the bit of the brain that causes us some issues, because those dogs that we've labelled reactive, aggressive, etc., they're operating from this part of the brain a lot of the time. It's this part of their brain that's on high alert, and sometimes it's actually working too hard, working when it doesn't need to be working. So the forebrain, that's where most of us want our dogs to be. In fact, it's where we would expect our dog will be when we get them, whether we get them as a pup or a rescue. We just make an assumption that our dog will always be operating in their forebrain. And that's the bit of the brain that does the listening. So we expect dogs to do what we say, do what we ask. We can call that cues or commands. We also expect our dogs to allow the vets to examine them. We expect them to accept being groomed. We expect them to be calm around other dogs or enjoy playing with other dogs. And we expect them to interact safely with people of all sizes, very small people and elderly people. So for a dog to be able to do that, they have to be acting from their forebrain. So without us to train the dog, most dogs' brains would be constantly moving between the hindbrain and midbrain. The forebrain would have some activity, but not as much as a dog that has been trained. So, for example, there's highly trained dogs such as police dogs, assistance dogs, sports dogs, etc. And there's pet dogs that have had some training, so their forebrain is a bit more developed, it's a bit more online than perhaps the wild dog. But the hindbrain and the midbrain is the most useful for these dogs that don't have a lot of people around them. They don't need to live or work with people. They just kind of live off of people. So it's really important to remember, if we've taken on a dog that's not had a lot of experience of being guided by people or being around people, so perhaps a street dog or a dog that's had an impoverished upbringing, perhaps it's been in a kennel for some reason, or it's been neglected, it's just been left alone, or maybe perhaps it's a second dog, or you've taken on a pair of dogs and the two dogs have bonded more closely than perhaps the person and the dog, then it's probable that the forebrain has not quite as developed as a dog that's undergone a lot of training, or had a very close relationship with a person and has had to work with that person. So it doesn't mean that we can't work with these dogs and get that forebrain developed. It's just going to take a lot longer and it's going to require more effort. So what I do is a process called sensitive exposure. And that's something that I've developed over the past 20 years of working with various rescue dogs from various organizations. And so what I do is I very sensitively and very carefully expose the dog either to unfamiliar stimuli, so things it's never experienced before, or things that for some reason the dog now finds frightening or maybe has always found frightening. So what I'm doing is I'm encouraging the dog to use their forebrain, but at the same time conditioning the midbrain, the limbic system, to slow down and to be less reactive. So how do we go about this? Well, first of all, we're going to look for safe spaces where our dogs can be still, or at very least where our dogs can slow down. Now, some dogs pull on the lead because they're actually stressed, and what they're trying to do, they're trying to get through the environment as quickly as possible. Just get it over with, get it done with. And that's one way of dealing with it. It's worked for them before, but it's highly unlikely that the places you're walking your dogs are really, really stressful. So if the dog can learn to slow down, they then might agree with you, actually it's not too bad at all. And in fact, it's actually quite enjoyable. There's things you can sniff here. There's nice wildlife to look at. So slowing them down and keeping them still is one way for their brain to be able to start learning. What you need to do is just check about for hazards. So think about other dogs, people, wildlife, traffic, etc. Make sure your dog is safe, so they can't back out their harness, their collar fits safely, they can't jump onto the road, then nothing's going to happen to them. So just look after your dog here. Prepare your rewards. So there's a popular protocol where dogs are taken to places or put in front of things that they're not particularly keen on, and then they're fed lots of food, which is usually described as a high value treat. Now, not all dogs want food under these conditions. They're quite nervous, they're quite stressed, their stomach's got a lot of acid in it because their flight and flight systems on high alert, and their stomachs, getting ready to shut everything down and run, and then we're trying to shovel food in them, and they take it because they're polite and they want to please us, but they're not really enjoying it, and they're just pretty miserable with the whole experience. Some dogs don't feel that way. Some dogs, the food makes them feel better and it gives them a way to cope. So you need to assess what your dog is. Other rewards might be verbal, so your dog might do well if you have some words that help them along. Maybe build up a set of words, so things like nice, cool, well done, excellent, good job. They can all be used just to encourage your dog and just make them feel safe. Just let them know that you're there and you're helping them along. Try not to get into the good boy, good boy, good boy, good boy habit, because that can get a bit boring for the dog. The other thing they might want to do is move on, or be allowed to go and sniff, investigate something. These things can all be seen as rewards by dogs. So get to know your dog, work out what they like to do, and see if you can build that into your routines outside. If you see any interactions with the environment and they're positive ones, then reward those. So things you might be looking for: air scenting, where they're sniffing the air, or they're moving towards something which previously they were avoiding. So perhaps they'd put the brakes on, they're pulling back, and now they decide, okay, I'll take a step forward. They might sniff the ground. For a dog to lower its head is quite difficult when they're stressed. So if they do that, that's good. You're investigating. Well done. Look for changes in their body language. So I've already mentioned lowering their head, but things like opening their mouths, the air scenting again, or looking at something that they've been afraid to look at. So if they're avoiding something, if they're looking away, avoidance is a very polite form of dog communication. It means no thank you, not just now. But there's some things they avoid which make no sense to avoid. So you know that what they're avoiding is perfectly safe. They just don't know what it is. They just can't see it through your point of view. So if they do then just glance at it, nice, good work, good work. So knowing when to reward and knowing when to stand still and just be with your dog it's an art form actually. It's a bit of a skill, and you can only build it up through practice. And whilst you're practicing, you're going to make mistakes. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for the fact you won't get it right every day. And what I suggest you do is that you keep some kind of log, photographs, just or have someone with you, or photograph your dog yourself, or jot some notes down when you get home. Just something so that if you had a few bad days or a couple of bad experiences, you can look back and just see how far you've come, because it's quite important that we encourage ourselves as well. So what I need you to remember is that this is a general guide, because every single dog is an individual. Every environment that you take them into is individual at that moment in time. An environment keeps changing throughout the day. The weather changes, the sun moves around. So everything is individual at that moment. We can only ever say at that moment in time under those conditions. So what we're going to talk about is a general guide. I'm just going to give you some guidelines to work with, but you have to constantly assess things and adjust things for your own dog. So a good time to be quiet is when your dog's concentrating and they're doing that work of processing the environment. And the only exception to that is if you have discovered that for your dog some pleasant murmurings, some quiet words actually assist. Your dog feels better when you do that. So if you're quiet, you're still, perhaps you are murmuring quietly, but that's where the dog's brain gets the best chance of calming itself down, where we're teaching this limbic system, the midbrain, that this thing that they feel just now is absolutely terrifying actually isn't at all. And it's probably something that they could learn to cope with, and it's not going to hurt them. So the body language you might see is pretty much like the picture here, where the head's lifted up, the mouth will be closed. That's quite an important part of assessment. And their ears may be forward and their tail may be up. But a lot of that depends on the breed and how your dog's ears and tail work for that individual breed. Now, some dogs may have some anxious or concerned body language. So if you feel your dog is anxious, you need to use your judgment, because some anxiety, but they can stay there, that will actually be an opportunity for their brain to do a bit of learning and learn that it can cope. So you need to very much know your dog, know how your dog reacts, put your dog's needs first, but just to see, can they cope with this, or should I really move on? So it's time to move on when your dog is panicking. Panic tends to look like moving backwards, bolting, trying to bolt, excessive panting when it isn't hot. So that would be a time that really you want to get your dog to safety. And don't be afraid to pick your dog up. If your dog's of a size that you can pick them up safely, then it's a good thing to do. Don't listen to anyone that tells you otherwise. It's time to move on when your dog is vocalizing. So unless you have one of those dogs that kind of chats away, then barking, growling, whining, etc., they're usually signs that your dog's aroused, and under those conditions they're unlikely to be able to use their forebrain. So there's no point us hanging around, because we're not going to be able to do what we want to do. So you might not have to leave completely, you might not have to go home, but you might have to create more space. So we're generally thinking about 10 feet as being the size of space where a dog can cope. That's quite a large space here in the UK. But so if you can establish a greater amount of space and then stop again and see if your dog can cope, then that would be the thing to do. When the environment becomes unsafe. So this is about you keeping your wits about you, doing your safety check-in, looking for your hazards. So other dogs, people, wildlife might show up, or it might have always been there, but now it starts moving and everything changes. So just to finish off, a few slides, just what does processing the environment body language look like? So we've got two dogs here doing some processing, completely different sizes, both dogs, and processing slightly differently. So the dog on the left, ears back, tail down, so slightly more worried whether he would flight or fight, we don't know. The dog at the back, terrier type, you can see the weights over the shoulders, the tail's up, the ears are forward, so that dog's getting ready. Both dogs, notice, mouth closed, so they're thinking, they're working. It's kind of important we stay quiet around them when they're in this state, and they're quite safe, so no need to do anything there. So this dog, a little bit different. So this dog's also processing. You see the closed mouth, but this one's a bit concerned. So you can see the tail, not tucked up under the belly, but not that far off. So tail's down. You can see the weight. The weight's going to the back. So the dog's getting ready to run away. So there's not much weight on the front legs, so the dog can turn away and escape. If this dog was on lead and had no choice to escape, This is the sort of dog which might react by trying to create space by shouting or being noisy, and we'd probably label that dog reactive. But what that dog actually wants is to get away, needs more space. The ears are down and back, and you can see that there's some sort of frown lines around the eyes. So these are all signs that this dog's a bit bothered, but obviously a young dog, so just learning. So this dog is very alert, as you would expect a German Shepherd to be, because that's what we bred them to be like. But it's nice and easy to see the body language. So the mouth's closed, the ears are fully up. They're ready to take in lots and lots of information. Now this dog's not too bothered either way. The weight's pretty even over all four legs, and you can see the tail, it's a sort of mid-tail. So the dog's neither overly aroused or worried by what's about to happen. So this is probably a dog that's doing its job, what we bred them to do, and is quite happy about it. The other thing I should point out is the eyes. There's no whites of the eyes there, so when we see whites of the eyes, that's another sign of anxiety. So quite soft eyes. So this is a dog that's very alert, working, but feeling quite good about it. And then these two are, they're processing, but they're very, very relaxed about it. So you can see the open mouths and the soft tongues. A dog that's stressed or about to bite you can't put its tongue out like that. They need to close their mouth and retract their tongue. So soft eyes on both dogs, no whites of the eyes. I like the Pharaoh hound because she's got one ear forward, one ear back. She's ready from all sides. So these dogs can react quickly, but right at this moment in time, they're quite relaxed and enjoying themselves. So I hope you found this useful. I'm going to try and upload this as a video, and it will be yours, and you can return to it whenever you wish. Thank you very much.